Should we move on to our second scenario with Miles Bridges not returning?
Let's do it. This one is going to be much more expansive for both of us, I feel like.
It is. I think we might even split this out into two parts, this podcast, depending how long this goes. So if Miles Bridges does not return to the Charlotte Hornets, the Hornets can free up between 25 to 35 million, depending on what they do with Bertans, depending on what they do with a bunch of other things. At that point, you have a pretty big hole in the wing forward areas, right? You've got T. Salon, Grant Williams, Brandon Miller, Bryce McGowans as your kind of wing forward combination. Unless I've missed someone there, let me know. That is what you're looking at. The free agent class, it's not great, folks. Unless you're a big Tobias Harris guy, like there is not a lot going on. And I don't think that matches the timeline, anything like that this new front office is laying out here. I'm gonna let's look at free agents first in this section, and then circle back to trades later. I looked at trade options here, and free agent options. I only really came with like 4 names, which I think would be really interest me, would get me a little bit intrigued. And they are Patrick Williams, Isaac Okoro, Caleb Martin, and Max Christie. Are there any other names in your free agent list in a world where Miles Bridges leaves that you're interested in?
See, these are the guys that I had written down. I had Najee Marshall, Xavier Tillman, Luke Cornett, and DeAnthony Melton. Those were the 4 players that I had down. You wouldn't be able to sign all of those guys, obviously, and I don't, as would your.
What were those? Najee Melton?
Najee Marshall, DeAnthony Melton, Xavier Tillman, and then hold on one second. Wait, yes, no, Najee Marshall, Xavier Tillman, Luke Cornett, DeAnthony Melton. There we go. Sorry about that. I had to find my list.
We talked about Cornett and Tillman already, right, in the previous section. So we know what sort of, we probably won't discuss them as much. We know what sort of money they're going for. Somewhere from what, like,
have and all that kind of stuff.
4 to 8 million, something in that range.
Yep.
Najee Melton, I didn't include them. I should have, actually, because they're 2 guys that I've talked a lot about, and I've actually written about both of them this summer. So I don't know why I didn't. I think I was thinking, I guess, bigger name above MLE level free agents is what I was thinking, to kind of use the cap space. Whereas like Najee and they might be above mid level actually. So
yeah, I think they're Najee 2 good Marshall. To me, Najee Marshall, the reason I put him in there, he's somebody that I would be willing to give out like a bit more than the MLE. Maybe not like a overpay or significant one to some degree, but I would give him close to 15 million, maybe even a little bit more average annual value on a 3 or 4 year contract, if that was what it took to get him here, just to make sure you can get like a guy that you like with that large amount of cap space that you would have.
The Melton one, I love the fit. I think he's actually like the best blend of like fit and everything for this team. I just don't see a world where he comes to Charlotte when they're not going to be competing for the player next year, not pushing hard. He's, getting on in his career. I think Philly have got his bird rights, so they can like bring him back even after spending their cap space. So I just don't see it happening. Like if it does, I will happily say I was wrong, and I think I'd be very behind it. The more I've learned about it, the more I've looked into it, the closer to free agents we've got, it just doesn't seem... I've not had any murmurings about Melton drawing interest from anywhere. Like, it just seems like he's going to go back to Philadelphia probably in the end on bird rights. Najee Marshall is a fascinating name. And guys, some people might not even know who he is. He plays for the Pelicans. He's a 2-3 who is a really good defender, plays extremely hard, is a underrated passer, and made a real jump with his 3-point shot last year, which was always the thing that let him down. That's why he couldn't get on the floor, because he couldn't shoot. And he made a jump. And is it a 1-year spike, or is he now able to shoot it? If he can shoot it, then he is a starting level wing in the NBA, and one that plays with great energy and can pass the ball and can spread the floor. So is a really interesting Swiss Army knife type player. What would you say his salary range is? 12 to 18 million?
Yeah, I would say basically full MLE to about 17, 18 million, I think is fair. I don't think he's going to get close to 20 million just because he's still a role player and that shooting has only been present for 1 year, but he's definitely somebody that's going to get paid pretty well, just given the performance that he's had over the last couple of years.
26 years old. So again, probably has like a good 5 to 6, 7 years of his prime left here ahead of him. Was former undrafted guy. Villanova? Is it Villanova at Villanova?
He went to Xavier.
Xavier,
actually.
apologies.
Yeah.
Wrong Big East team.
No, another blue Big East school, so I understand how you can get that mixed up.
In the right region-ish. Okay, so Najee Marshall, I think he makes sense. Again, in this scenario, you got 25 to 30 million, easily enough to probably go out and sign. If you say Najee Marshall's the guy we want to sign, you could go do it. Isaac Okoro for the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is an interesting one. He's a restricted free agent, but the Cavs are about 11 million from the tax line. So essentially, you make Okoro an offer around 18 to 20 million per year. They would either have to let him walk, or then the Cavs are having to basically make cost savings elsewhere, like just trying to move guys in maybe into Detroit space, right? It might be a George Niang, it might be a Dean Wade, but these guys are also guys who play for the Cavs. They might not want to do that. And Okoro did kind of struggle to get on the floor in the end, right? Last year in the playoffs, it kind of all went a little bit pear-shaped despite the 39% shooting. But we talked about he was a comp for Steph Castle, like quite a good like low-end comp. And we talked about the fit of that on this roster countless times. We didn't talk about Tijon Salon much, but we did talk about Steph Castle a lot. Maybe we can copy and paste some of that analysis for Isaac Okoro here. Are you interested in Okoro in making an offer sheet to try and go get like a wing, like point of attack defender to play that role, which again, this team still lacks unless you think Cody Martin can do it?
See, that's the thing. I would definitely want to move Cody Martin if you're signing Isaac Okoro. I just find them to have a lot of overlap where, and you could definitely say that to some degree about Najee Marshall, but I think where Najee Marshall separates himself from the both of them really is as a playmaker, and I think he's just a more like versatile defender as well, and also pretty good rebounder for the position as well. Like, I feel like if you're going to have, like, you can only have so many like wings that are not generally respected as shooters. Like we saw in the playoffs, like you mentioned, like every team that the Cavs played just let Isaac Okoro shoot. Like it didn't matter that he shot 39% from three in the regular season.
Yeah.
It wasn't on high enough volume. And even then, that's not a high enough percentage to like really punish teams. No team that they played had any. Yeah, like legitimately. Like if you like, as soon as he caught the ball, his defender would just turn around or take a step back just to literally let him shoot, because any team that played them thought it was a better alternative than basically any other type of shot that the Cavaliers could get. So that alone just kind of scares me a little bit, because he's going to have to obviously do even more work to build a reputation as a shooter and floor spacer that teams have to respect. But like you said, that point of attack defense is very valuable. He is also a versatile defender in his own right. And like, even if teams are leaving him open, he's still shooting 39%, which is decent enough in the regular season to help you get by. And hopefully, like over time, he would just continue building that up and become an even better shooter, or a guy that could attack a closeout to a little bit better of a degree. But yeah, him and Cody Martin are, yes, he's much younger than Cody Martin and Najee Marshall as well. So
he's
a lot more upside theoretically,
a lot more room for growth. Interesting. You talked about earlier, like you'd want to move Cody Martin. How about this for an idea? Could you sign and trade Okoro to Charlotte and send Cody Martin to Cleveland in return? So they maintain their point of attack defender, Cleveland, but they get him for what, $8 million, which Cody Martin is on for this year and next year. And then the Hornets get Okoro, who's much younger, has a better track record, probably a little bit more potential. Like that's actually an interesting idea where like Cleveland don't lose them for nothing. And it kind of makes a little bit of sense for both teams.
I think Cleveland would probably do that, right? Like you stay way further away from the tax than they would be.
Well, if you're going to pay Okoro $25 million per year, then they would, right? Like, it depends how high you want to go with the salary. And I don't think I'd go that high. Like I feel comfortable probably in like the 15 to 18 range, but then I don't know if that's enough to get Cleveland scared. Like you might have to put a 2 on it to make them bolt and go, okay, let's work something out here. But that's the one out of all of these that I think makes most sense. I think he fits perfectly next to between LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. I think that contract, like as long as he would continue to develop like you'd expect a 23-year-old to do, and he has all the characteristics that we've heard Jeff Peterson and Charles Lee talk about for the last week. So that's the one that really stands out to me, and it would be a long-term play. We talked about Patrick Williams on our last episode a little bit. I don't think either of us get super excited about it, but like we could like understand it's just a reclamation project, right? He's super young. He's got some gifts. Maybe he just comes to Charlotte in a completely different situation and he's able to find something. I think, like, what would you value Patrick Williams as? I think they extended a qualifying offer. Who would you value more, Patrick Williams or Isaac Okoro?
Definitely Isaac Okoro. I think his like position and the role that he projects to play with this team is much more valuable, like, and also not filled yet, like, or at least in a long-term capacity. Like Cody Martin hasn't been healthy enough to fill that role in the last couple of years. Like Grant Williams kind of fills the role that Patrick Williams would have, or at least similar enough, while being at this stage anyway, like a better playmaker, having like a higher feel for the game, I think, and just a better player to put on your offense or play like big minutes with right now. An equally almost efficient shooter. I probably would value Isaac Okoro, maybe not like significantly more, but quite a bit more than Pat Williams at this stage. Just for the Hornets, at least. Like it would depend on the team, but for the Hornets specifically, I would take Okoro by a considerable margin.
I don't know if it's considerable because I don't love either of them, but I think it just makes sense for this team.
Yeah, I guess that's probably fair. I wouldn't necessarily throw $23 million at Isaac Okoro or something myself, but yeah, more appealing for sure.
Caleb Martin, Max Christie. I mean, Caleb Martin, do we want to do this hoodoo again, right? But he played a lot of small forward and power forward in Miami. He's got a lot better. There's the part of me that thinks there's no way they would ever do it just because it's like, surely you can't go back and it'd be so embarrassing. But equally, he's someone who clearly likes Charlotte. He has ties to the area. His brother plays here, and maybe he would just like to come back home and play with his brother for basically the remainder of his prime and career. It just depends on the person, and I just don't have a close enough read on Caleb to know what that is. But if let's say Caleb said, Jeff, I want to come back and live in Charlotte. I want to play with Cody. I think I can help you bring a defensive identity, my toughness, my shooting. I'm happy to play both the 3 and the 4, which are positions of need now Miles Bridges has gone. But I need to be paid a fair amount. Like, let's say 18 million per year, 15, 18 million per year. What are your thoughts on that? What are you doing if you're Jeff Peterson?
I mean, I think I would be all over that. The salary is like slightly hesitant, but like you said, Caleb is about a perfect fit for this team. Like in the same way that like Okoro, Marshall, like these just like athletic, rangy, versatile wings that shoot well enough to stretch out a defense, can attack a closeout, finish at the rim, offer some sort of playmaking, finishing versatility in some way. Like these are the types of players that they need. Like in theory, they have LaMelo, Brandon Miller locked in right now, at least as their like 2 main shot creators. You have Trey Mann and NSJ as shot creators with some potential as well. Like you kind of need the guys that are going to do the dirty work to fill in like the gaps around them. All 3 of those guys do that. I would be all in on Caleb as well, just given the type of player that he is, but he is definitely a much more specific situation than any of the other guys we've talked about, obviously, given his history here and having been waived by the team a couple of years ago and latching on with Miami and then growing into the type of player that we see now in another organization after the Hornets cut him loose. But it doesn't seem like he has like, any sort of like remorse for the situation. Like, I don't think he dislikes the Hornets franchise, especially now that they have a totally new cast of front office members and coaching staffs. And I also don't think that he's just like the type of guy to hold a grudge either, given all of his, appearances in the media and press conferences. But right, like you said, yeah, you just don't know. Like
he did say in an interview, I would have waived me too, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought I remembered him doing like some sort of interview where he was like, yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah.
Well, he was like, I looked at my stats after I got waived, and I looked at him and went, "Shit, I would have waived me too." That's exactly
right.
what he said.
Yeah, like he at least understands the business of the NBA. Yeah,
yeah. I did not expect to see Richaun Holmes declining his 12.8 million player option.
I was just going to mention that too.
But
yeah,
it actually makes sense.
Yeah.
He's re-signed for another year, but basically he's a human trade exception. That's why it's happened, basically, for anyone who's thinking, why is he? He's only got $250K guaranteed in the second year of his new deal, so he's basically there to be traded. There you go, people. Max Christie, maybe like a sneaky name. The Lakers put a qualifying offer out for him. He's a young player who was on a second-round pick, but actually, like, he really played well at some league last year. He's the kind of guy that I sometimes think the internet's a bit higher on than maybe the NBA world is, but it was like a highly heralded recruit coming out of high school. Is a 2/3 who shot the ball really well last year. The Lakers just might not be able to afford to keep him. And I think you could probably, like, if you threw like a 3 years, 30 at him, like, I think you can probably have Max Christie. Are you a Max Christie guy? He was a big guy in draft world a few years ago.
I wasn't a huge Max Christie guy. I was a Cam Christie guy this year. I actually had him as a first rounder and was hoping that he would be a player the Hornets took at 42, though obviously perfectly fine with their KJ Simpson selection in that range. But yeah, I think you're definitely right about the perception that like Max Christie is probably a little bit higher, or the internet is a little bit higher on Max Christie than the NBA seems to be. I also feel like the Lakers are going to try pretty hard to keep him just because they have a really limited number of young players right now that have any real ability to contribute now and be in the rotation now. Like Jalen Hood-Schifino, as much as I liked him as well, doesn't really seem like a guy that can play for them like on opening night this year, for example. Like Max Christie could conceivably be like your ninth man and play 12 minutes or something for the Lakers anyway, if you needed to. For the Hornets, he would be playing much more than that, getting what the reps he needs to develop. But the Lakers like need guys like him in their system, or else they're kind of just going to be scrambling for like draft picks year in and year out because they don't really have a whole lot of young talent. I remember Rob Pelinka. Right, but that's the question. I mean, if he gets some sort of offer from the Hornets that's like, I don't know, like maybe like half the MLE, maybe a little bit more, like that type of range, like approaching like 8 to 10 million like a year in their yearly value, like they probably can't like that just and without being like a wildly expensive team. But I remember the other day Rob Pelinka was doing a press conference and I saw a quote from it where he listed their young core was Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, Jackson Hayes, JHS, and Max Christie. But first of all, Rui and Austin Reeves are going to be 27 on opening night of this season, so I don't know if they count in the young core there. But that's like emphasizing my point. Like they don't have like they're counting 27-year-olds that are already on their second contract as players in their young core because they don't really have a whole lot now that they've just added Bronny and Dalton Connect as well. Like they just kind of need to keep these guys like in the pipeline rather than only having like one or two young players at a time. And I feel like it'd be tough to pry them away, even though the Hornets, like they need to be taking on like that exact type of player that Max Christie is right now.
Yeah, he's just an interesting name to keep an eye on, I think, as this plays out. Any other big free agency names that I've not mentioned there that you had in mind if Bridges were to leave?
Honestly, there aren't too many. I feel like you just got to run through like the list of players that can basically fit 2 through 4 and then look at like the tough, rangy, physical guys that can make an impact on both ends of the floor. Look at the 5s that can shoot. I don't even. I'm all set. We'll pass on that one. I would rather find a way to clear out the cap space for Paul George if we're going to get crazy and go that way and just try and offer him like 37 million or something. And
Klay Thompson.
Every person.
By the way,
he might be even worse than Tobias Harris at a certain point. But yeah, sidebar, it's going to be so weird when he's on another team.
That's broke when we're recording right now. Like, seeing Klay Thompson not in a Warriors jersey is going to make my head melt. That's going to be strange. So
him and those
I hope they can
Orlando
actually
Magic pinstripes.
Oh my god, can you imagine him in the Southeastern Division? Okay, well that's it for free agent options. Let's move on to trades. And I think this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. I actually think this is probably more likely than the Hornets going out and making a big free agency splash. The new ownership and front office have been pretty... They've tried to manage expectations a lot about free agency, right? They've been reluctant to promise anything and talked about how basically they need to build from within and everything like that. And from what we've already seen in the draft, where they've taken on Reggie Jackson's contract to eat into their free agency spending power, essentially for 3 second-round picks, I expect more of that. So I actually think this is where the biggest potential is. Now, the first thing I'll say is before we get into it, trade rules have got way more complicated because of the new CBA with the first apron and the second apron. And also just with the state of the NBA, where all the teams with bad salaries have like no assets to get rid of them. So it's like, oh, Clippers, you need to get rid of PJ Tucker. Great. Send us a pick. You don't have a single pick to send. So like, why is anyone going to take PJ Tucker? That's an example. Then you've got teams who like can't aggregate salaries. Okay. So they can't put salaries together, or they can't take a salary that is higher, even by $1, than the salary that they're sending out. So it makes these teams where they've got guys who are like, well, obviously that team wants to get rid of that player. It just makes them really difficult to get rid of. So that's just kind of one thing when going through this. We're still learning ourselves, I think, with the new CBA, adapting and everything, but it is just not as simple as it used to be. But I'm going to list just a bunch of guys who I think are candidates to be dumped as salary dumps this offseason. And then I'm happy for you to take me to any of the names. And I think we'll probably cross over on a few of where you want to go. So I have Pat Connaughton on Milwaukee Bucks, making $9 million a year for the next 2 years. Also used to be coached by Charles Lee, notable again. PJ Tucker with the Clippers, earning $11.5 million this year. Jacques Londale, $8 million per year for the next 3 years for the Houston Rockets. You got all the Warriors guys: Gary Payton, Kevin Looney, Moses Moody might even be a salary dump guy now. Like, we didn't think AJ Griffin was. Newsflash, during the draft, he was. Moses Moody might be the same. You've got Andrew Wiggins as well there from the Warriors. Then you've got the Lakers, Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, Rui Hachimura, like maybe even Hud Shafino. I just don't even know. You've got the Kings with Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes. The Hawks, I don't know. Is DeAndre Hunter or Clint Capella or Bogdanovich? Are they like, they were bumping up against attacks at one point? That's why they made the AJ Griffin trade. Those are some of like the clearest names that I could find of like obvious candidates who would be looking to move. Like Tim Hardaway already got moved. Some names have already gone. Are there any other names that you want to throw in? Or is there anywhere that you immediately get drawn to when looking at kind of absorbing some of these salaries for other assets?
The two guys that I actually had like rough trade outlines for in my notes for this podcast were Kevin Huerter and Gabe Vincent. So, I mean, which of those two do you think, I guess, is more realistic? And then what would your preference align with what player you think is more realistic? Or do you have like a strong preference for one of the two? Because, and like you mentioned, the Lakers are one of those teams has a trade restriction. They are a second apron team. They cannot aggregate salary with any of the players that they would be sending out, like Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, Jalen Hood-Schifino. They all have to be traded out like as individuals in a trade. They can receive multiple players back if they need to, but they cannot be aggregated with other players in a trade. Yeah. It's just Gabe Vincent and a pick, or Vanderbilt and a pick, or so on and so forth.
I think Kevin Huerter is the more likely trade candidate for several reasons. One, the Kings have more picks to be able to send out with him. Like, the Lakers don't have much that they can trade out. And if they do they really want to be using their assets to get rid of Gabe Vincent? Like, he might actually play for them next year, Gabe Vincent. He was just injured this whole year with a knee injury. So I think Kevin Huerter is more likely for that reason. Also, just like say, not in that same second apron issue, so how a much easier, more flexible trade partner. And we know Kevin Huerter has been like on the trade block since last year's trade deadline, and he plays shooting guard, small forward, which is probably more of a position of need for the Hornets as well. So I would say let's start with Kevin Huerter as a point. I will say I don't think he's not a PJ Tucker. Like, we just want to get rid of him somewhere, and he's not going to give us any value at all. I still actually think he'd maybe be in the rotation with the Kings. So I think they'd be looking to get rid of him to save money, but I don't think it will be maybe for a total just we want rid of him and nothing in return. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. He played slightly fewer minutes last year, and I was looking this up in preparation, but he's still like a mid 20 minutes per game player, like bona fide rotation guy in the NBA. I'm pretty sure he started like 60 games this past year. Like he kind of faded out in the playoffs as it became evident that they had like better options at that position, like Malik Monk in particular, who they just signed to a massive extension. But I mean, he's definitely somebody that they would move on from, but I totally agree. It's not like a strict salary dump where they like are just going to give up like massive assets to get off of him. I feel like they've got to have some sort of incentive for it.
I mean, and they already just gave up Devin Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov to the Raptors in another salary dump for former Hornet, Jalen McDaniels. Shout out Jalen McDaniels on the show, who got traded. So they've already like done some salary dumping. And I expect they look to probably do a little bit more here to give them more flexibility. What do you think a Kevin Huerter deal looks like? Like the Hornets could obviously just absorb him for $16.8 million. Probably like giving up draft picks would probably be the Kings' option, or to send back a salary which earns a lot less for a shorter amount of time, maybe like a Cody Martin. But then they just drafted Devin Carter, so I don't really think that works. So maybe it would just be draft picks. Is that what you're thinking here? Back for Kevin Huerter?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you could throw Bertans in there too if they just wanted to have like a salary on the books, and they could then flip him at the deadline, making 16 million for somebody, or waive him even at a certain point. Like you could do that, but just to make it more simple, like Kevin Huerter, they have a lot of second round picks. Maybe if you just want one like valuable one, maybe the 2025 second via Portland, which we can imagine will be like 35, 36, like at the absolute lowest. They could throw in like one of their own seconds in an upcoming year when they can imagine, hopefully, that they'll be beyond like 45, being one of the upper half teams in the league, and basically just throwing them a two-way contract. I think something like that would be very realistic and would appeal to both sides. I actually like Kevin Huerter a lot as a player. He fits very well with this team. Really good, like ball screen, handoff playmaker and scorer, can create his own shot, willing passer. Not a good defender, but I don't think he's like bad or like unplayable defensively necessarily. He gives you enough like offensive versatility, I think, and at least being able to guard his position at like a subpar to average level to where he is worth playing. He may not be worth, at least to the Kings, the salary that he's making right now.
Yeah, he gives you an off-ball, like off-screen shooter, right? Which the Hornets just don't
he can really shoot, like 38% for his career for the last 6 seasons. Like he can he's a bona fide like floor spacer at this level.
Whether he has that toughness, competitive gene, I just don't know. Like that's
that might be the shortcoming for sure.
But I would be interested in this. Like, I think there's worse things you can do than just like take a swing, and I think it's maybe a movable deal like later on, even if he's not right for here or he does well, and you can flip him again. It's like Kevin Huerter and the 2025 second. I think that's, for Davis Bertans. I would even maybe throw in like a bad second protected in return, something like that. I could see it. I could see it. If they were really motivated to get off the money. Again, my question is, do they need to as much now they've already made that Mitchell-Vezenkov trade? It would probably this would be, I think, a precursor for them for another move. Like if they could get Kyle Kuzma, or if they were getting Zach LaVine, then maybe this is something that they do as a predecessor to that.
Yeah, that would make sense, and this would give them especially if they traded it just into the Hornets space for no player. This would just give them another roster spot to play with as well, which for a team that's like trying to compete can be infinitely valuable just for trades, a free agent signing, some sort of buyout guy, a two-way contract that you then promote to a standard contract halfway through the season. So teams, I feel like, that are more competitive are much more willing and desire more to keep that roster spot open. And maybe they value that, and that might be something that the Hornets can offer them and that other teams cannot.
Yeah. I will say with these like teams where they've got very few assets, like a PJ Tucker or you could use the Warriors example, the Lakers, they're probably going to be some really complicated like 3, 4, 5 team sign and trade, these things that just like trades get added and built into them. Where those happen, sometimes assets can end up getting flipped, right? And all of a sudden you get a second round pick that goes via a team to another team. And there's things that could happen there. And I think that's something we can't rule out. They're just impossible to predict. I have a trade which you're going to love. I'm so happy. I can't wait to see your face. All right. Jack Londale to the Charlotte Hornets. Grant Williams to the Rockets. And Tari Eason to the Charlotte Hornets.
That was me pulling my bow and arrow back and launching it into the air and sniping one of those skeet shooters right out. Yeah, no, that would be incredible.
Hear me out. Where did Grant Williams have a successful playoff run? In Boston under what coach? Ime Udoka, who is now with the Houston Rockets. They've just drafted Cam Whitmore last year, who plays similar positions to Tari. Tari came off a serious injury last year. You've got Jack Londale, who's got 3 years, $8 million, bad salary. So what you're basically doing here is you're giving the Rockets a ready-to-go, playoff-ready power forward in Grant Williams, who we know Ime Udoka loves. You're getting them off the bad salary of Londale, and you're moving on from Eason, but in a world where you're basically already got Whitmore there anyway. I actually think this is reasonable, and as much as Grant is really interesting in Charlotte, and I think actually he's probably going to be a really key player going forward in the next couple of years, the Tari upside swing intrigues me. It intrigues me, Chase. What do you think of this? Do you think this is realistic?
Oh boy, I mean, does this intrigue me too? I think it's realistic, especially with how Tari Eason's stock has got to be a little bit lower than it was as we're coming off of his rookie season, where he made an all-rookie team, but he only played 22 games last year. He is a good shooter, but not a great shooter at the 4 or the 3. Grant Williams, obviously a better shooter, and with the young players on that roster in Houston right now, maybe they need a little bit more spacing from the front court. Man, I would do this in an absolute heartbeat if this came available to the Hornets. I would add. Yeah, no question. I think Houston would maybe they would need a second or something like that just to get off of Tari, who clearly has potential and is a pretty easily projectable modern power forward in today's game. Honestly, in a lot of very similar ways as to John Salon. But Tari is already a ready-made player that can play in the league right now. He's still only 23, so he has a bunch of upside left as well. Theoretically, if you're trading for him, you'd think that he's going to be able to grow into something even bigger with a healthier season. I would think that, the Hornets, I would imagine, would be all in on this. Obviously, you don't want to trade Grant, who is somebody that clearly wants to be here. You don't think so?
Yeah, well, I think this is the classic internet loves it because it's the young, interesting Tari Eason guy, and the Hornets have been around Grant Williams, and he's been so good for this group from a leadership culture perspective. I think he gives you what you want there, whereas Tari, I don't think is that guy. I'm pretty sure he's not that guy. I think we knew that coming out of college in the draft process. Not he's bad, he's just not a culture setter kind of Grant is. So yeah. I don't know if they would, but I think it's I would have a meeting about it. I would want to talk about it.
Yeah, I would be all into that one, but I think both sides could pretty easily be talked into the benefits from that as well.
Okay, are there any other trade names out there that you think, in terms of taking on salary or any other trades, just using that cap space that you think makes sense?
I've got a rough framework for Gabe Vincent as well, and this is obviously much more specific, but do you think Cody Martin, Vasa Micic for Gabe Vincent and a lottery-protected first in 2029 or 2030, whatever year the Lakers can finally trade one that conveys to 2 seconds or something if the Lakers do end up being in the lottery that year, but otherwise the Hornets get it if it's 15 and below? Do you think that's something the Lakers would find to be worth it? Obviously, Gabe Vincent didn't play very much, but even when he did, was not very good last year. So they could essentially, from their perspective, say we're trading one not great rotation player for 2 guys that could at least have the ceiling of being a pretty effective rotation player. Cody Martin, you can imagine, would be a pretty good fit with their team as
well. I know,
but
I think they'd look at Cody Martin and say exactly what you just said about Gabe Vincent.
Yeah, that's honestly, yeah.
I don't think they do it for a few reasons. One, they don't have many firsts to trade, and I just don't think you trade one of your firsts for Micic and Martin. I don't think Micic is a good fit with AD or with LeBron. And I just think Martin has, like, if Cody Martin was coming off his year where he earned his free agency contract, like, then I would get it. Like, I think a lot of teams would be interested because you can see the vision. I just think too many teams are like, when we've got like 1 or 2 cards left to play, I'm not taking the risk on Cody Martin's knee/hit. Like, it's just too scary for me. So I don't think they would do that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And this is where it's tough because, like, you can't add players to this trade. I wish the Lakers weren't a second apron team because otherwise it would be such an easy team for the Hornets. Yeah, they'd be such an easy team for the Hornets to get like a future second or a future first from, taking on like Jackson Hayes, Jared Vanderbilt, like Hood Schifino, Gabe Vincent. Like, if they could take multiple of those players away at once while sending back like Cody Martin, Nick Richards, whoever else that the Lakers would want, I feel like that would be such an easy deal to make. But unfortunately, the new CBA is designed for those deals to not be so easy. But the Hornets will have plenty of other options anyway.
I don't know if we have many more trades to discuss here. Have you got anything else?
I don't think so. Those were the only 2 that I had written down in specific. There are just so many options that the Hornets have right now with the Bertans contract, whether or not they use it for trade or waive him, whether or not the big domino falls with Miles coming back or Miles leaving. Like, they're just like almost an infinite amount of routes for the Hornets to take right now. So it's going to be very exciting to see where they go over the next week or 2.
There's a lot of cap space to dump contracts into, right? Detroit have got 50 million. Mm-hmm. Charlotte in this scenario would have 25, 30. That's 80 million of cap space. But the teams that need to dump don't have the assets to dump them. Like, a lot of them have already done that during the draft. They've already sent, second round picks and everything. And I'm fascinated to see how this plays out. Maybe there are teams and players that we're not thinking about right now, because let's say Paul George says, I want to go, I don't know, to Golden State. He's not going to do this reportedly, but let's say he did. All of a sudden, Golden State would be like, we need to make space. Like, let's send someone here, send someone there. We'll like do whatever. Take Moses Moody if you take Kevin Looney. Like, that's the kind of like, that starts to like motivate. And that's kind of hard to predict where we are in this holding pattern. But Klay Thompson's going to sign somewhere. Paul George is going to sign somewhere. So I think that is good news, is that there are going to be some big names that are going to sign as free agents somewhere. And they'll be looking at cap space teams. They'll also be looking at teams who might say, like, Paul George might call up, I don't know, New York tomorrow and say, hey, I'd sign there if you can make this cap space. And New York start going, okay, well, let's try and find a way. It's probably a bad example because of the trade they've just made, but you get my point. And that could happen. And the Hornets can then, that's where Jeff Peterson's quote comes in. It's about being flexible and like being strategic and having like being ready to, when opportunities arise, you can take advantage of them. So like not committing to anything too early. What do you think is more likely in the scenario that Miles goes? One of those free agent signings or one of these? I mean, we didn't really find many good kind of trades there, but you think some form of trade, even if we didn't find it going through this exercise?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the reasons why also is one of the guys that I had identified, like just thinking about this in the last couple of weeks, was Tim Hardaway. He already got traded to the Detroit Pistons for Quentin Grimes. Like, that would have been a prime candidate for the very similar type of trades that we just talked about with the last couple of guys that would just be salary dumps. But a couple of them are already gone. I mean, there, like you said, there are so many teams that just don't really have like the requisite assets. And then the ones that do, it's almost like, why? Like, they can almost like do like an inverse, like holding out for the best offer sort of way. Like, they don't need to just dump Georges Niang to the first team that asks. If you're Cleveland and you want to make some sort of signing, like, you can wait for the one that makes the most sense and then figure it out that way. So it's going to be, I feel like there's just going to be a lot of moving parts over the next like couple weeks like teams like making those 3 and 4 team sign and trades, like you said. Like if Miles doesn't come back, like that's a team around the league that's going to be using a large sum of their cap space to sign him, which is then going to spur movement from other teams to react to it, and then from the Hornets themselves to fill that cap space in some way. So yeah, I'm really anticipating this next week or two. The CBA is going to make the first like off season where it's actually implemented very interesting from an outsider's perspective, just seeing how the teams deal with this for the first time. There's no like prerequisite for this. They have no idea how it's going to go.
Look, my gut reaction, if you were to ask me today, I would still say I think Miles Bridges returns. And then I think they maybe absorb like not much would change. Like say one of those, maybe absorb another player someone's trying to get rid of if they find someone, or if not, just maybe like even carry an open roster spot into the season.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world.
They could even carry cap space into the season. Like we talked about there, if nothing comes along that they can like no one to dump and no assets to come, carry that cap space into the season. I guarantee something will happen at some point where people go, oh, we need somewhere to send salary. I think OKC did it a few years ago, right? And they picked up some picks during the season. I can't remember the trade, but it would be okay to carry cap space into the season as well, again, to give that flexibility. So like we said right at the top of this podcast, there are a ton of options on how this thing can play out. It's really going to be fascinating to see how they navigate it. And I think we're going to get a real inkling into how they're going to work and function and structure and what their strategy is for team building going forward with their results.